Some songs had to fight just to exist. The label hated them. The critics laughed at them. Radio wouldn't touch them. And yet, they became some of the most beloved recordings of the 20th century. These are 10 songs from the 60s and 70s everyone mocked until they became massive hits. Number 10, What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong.
I see trees of green.
It's one of the most recognized songs ever recorded. But when it was first released in 1967, it barely sold 1,000 copies in the United States. The song was written by Bob Thiele, working under the pseudonym George Douglas, and George David Weiss. They wrote it with Louis Armstrong in mind, and Armstrong loved it immediately. He recorded it on August 16, 1967, after a midnight show at the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas.
I see friends shaking hands.
By 2 in the morning, he was in the studio with an orchestra, bringing the song to life. The problem wasn't Armstrong. It was Larry Newton, the president of ABC Records, who despised the song. Newton had recently signed Armstrong to ABC after the huge success of Hello, Dolly in 1964, a swinging up-tempo number that had actually knocked the Beatles off the top spot on the Billboard Hot 100. He wanted more of the same. A slow, tender ballad about the beauty of the world was the last thing on his list. Newton showed up at the Las Vegas recording session to get promotional photographs of his new star.
And I think to myself,
When he realized what was being recorded, he tried to shut the whole thing down. He was physically removed from the studio and locked out. That didn't sit well with him. As retaliation, he refused to promote the single when it was released that September. The result was predictable. In America, the song stalled at number 116 on the Billboard Bubbling Under chart. But in the United Kingdom, it was a completely different story. There, EMI gave it proper promotion, and it shot to number 1 in April 1968, becoming the biggest-selling single of the entire year in Britain. Armstrong, at 66 years old, became the oldest male artist to top the UK singles chart.
really saying, I love you.
Back home, American audiences barely heard it at all until 1988, when Robin Williams starred in Good Morning Vietnam, and the film used the song in a scene juxtaposing Armstrong's gentle voice against footage of war. The recording was re-released as a single and reached number 32 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999. Armstrong died in 1971, just 4 years after recording it. He never saw it become what it is today, one of the most played, most covered, and most cherished songs in history. What makes the story feel even more remarkable is the contrast between what Larry Newton saw, an old man singing a slow, unfashionable song, and what audiences eventually recognized. Armstrong had been performing since the 1920s, had topped the charts in 1964, and was in the final chapter of a career that had already changed music forever. He performed What a Wonderful World everywhere he could, on television, at concerts, wherever someone would listen. He understood what the song was. Newton, the man with the power to take it to the public, simply couldn't see it. In 2021, Rolling Stone placed Armstrong's recording at number 171 on its list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. A song that sold fewer than 1,000 copies in its home country upon release now has over 2 million digital downloads in the United States alone.
Yes, I think to myself.
Number 9, Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. By 1966, the Beach Boys were considered a fun, sun-drenched pop group, the kind of band that made cheerful songs about surfing and cars. When Brian Wilson began crafting something entirely different, the reaction from critics was skeptical. To put it mildly, Wilson had been pushing boundaries with pet sounds that same year, and critics in the United States largely dismissed it. He poured even more energy into Good Vibrations, which he described not as a single song, but as a collection of fragments, what he called feels, that he pieced together like a mosaic. Recording took place across 20 sessions in 4 separate studios, spanning 7 months. The finished single cost close to $25,000 to produce, which at the time was a record figure for a single. By comparison, the entire Pet Sounds album had cost $70,000. The song featured instruments that had never been heard on a pop record in quite that way, particularly the electro-theremin, which gave it that unusual, science fiction-like texture. When America's top disc jockey at the time, known as Cousin Brucey, first heard it, he said he didn't like it. It was simply too different from everything the Beach Boys had done before. That reaction was common among critics who expected more California girls from the band. They saw Wilson's shift as pretentious overreach. Among the majority of American music critics, there was a general agreement at the time that the Beach Boys were still too square, and that Good Vibrations wasn't enough to change that perception. The public disagreed entirely. The single debuted in October 1966 and climbed to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in December, staying there for 1 week. It also topped the charts in the UK, France, Spain, Malaysia, and New Zealand, among others. It earned 4 Grammy nominations and was later inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1994. Rolling Stone eventually ranked it as the 6th greatest song of all time. Number 8, Born to Be Wild by Steppenwolf. Before it became one of the defining anthems of 1960s rock and one of the most recognizable opening riffs in American music, Born to Be Wild was a song nobody wanted. Written by Canadian songwriter Mars Bonfire, the song was shopped around to multiple bands and labels, all of which passed on it. One of the groups that declined was a band called The Human Expression. The song simply didn't fit anyone's vision at the time. It was raw, loud, and driving in a way that the mainstream hadn't quite caught up to yet. Steppenwolf eventually recorded it, and the version they released in 1968 became something else entirely. It peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and crossed over into rock history almost overnight. When it appeared on the soundtrack of Easy Rider in 1969, a film that became a cultural landmark of the counterculture era, the song took on an identity that went far beyond its chart position. It became synonymous with the open road, with freedom, with a generation that was doing things its own way. The phrase heavy metal thunder in the lyrics is widely cited as one of the earliest uses of the term heavy metal to describe a sound, a detail that became historically significant as that genre took shape in the years that followed. Every band that turned it down eventually had to live with that decision. Mars Bonfire, born Dennis Edmonton, wrote the song after being inspired by a newspaper headline about motorcycles. He never imagined it would end up in a film that became one of the defining cultural artifacts of its decade. Bonfire was working at a gas station when Steppenwolf first had a hit with one of his earlier compositions, and he had been quietly shopping songs around the industry before Born to Be Wild finally landed somewhere. Steppenwolf released it in May 1968, and it was in the charts within weeks. The song's appearance in Easy Rider the following year sealed its place in the broader cultural record. That film, which starred Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper, captured a specific feeling of restlessness and freedom that resonated deeply with younger American audiences. Born to Be Wild fit the imagery so naturally that the two became inseparable in people's minds. The song has never really left the airwaves since.
Born to be wild.
Number 7, Son of a Preacher Man by Dusty Springfield.
Who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man.
The songwriters John Hurley and Ronnie Wilkins wrote Son of a Preacher Man in 1968 with one specific singer in mind, Aretha Franklin. It seemed like a natural fit. Franklin was the undisputed queen of soul, and the song had that slow, warm, southern feel that suited her perfectly. There was also a personal connection. Aretha's father, the Reverend C.L. Franklin, was one of the most famous preachers in America. But Franklin turned the song down. She felt recording it might come across as disrespectful to her father and his ministry.
Billy Ray was a preacher's son, and when his daddy would visit, he'd call.
The song was then passed to Jerry Wexler, who was producing Dusty Springfield's sessions in Memphis for her Atlantic debut album Dusty in Memphis. He thought it was ideal for her. Springfield recorded it, though she was reportedly unhappy with how her vocal came out. She felt it sounded too British and wanted to redo it. Producer Tom Dowd had already sent it to be released before she got the chance. Despite her reservations, the public didn't share them.
Isn't always easy, no matter how hard I try.
The single reached number 9 in the UK and number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. When Aretha Franklin heard Dusty's version, she changed her mind entirely and recorded the song herself in 1970. Franklin's version appeared on her album This Girl's in Love with You, but it was released only as a B-side, a much smaller showing than Dusty's had been. The song found a second life in 1994 when Quentin Tarantino featured it in Pulp Fiction. Tarantino reportedly said he would have scrapped the scene entirely if he hadn't been able to secure the rights to Dusty's version. A whole new generation discovered it, and a re-release reached number 1 in Iceland the following year.
Sweet Lola, son of a preacher man.
Number 6, Lola by the Kinks. The Kinks released Lola in 1970, and before it could even find its footing with the public, the BBC banned it. Not for the song's subject matter, which dealt with themes of gender identity in a way that was genuinely groundbreaking for the time, but because it contained a reference to Coca-Cola by name. The BBC had a strict rule against using brand names in songs to avoid the appearance of advertising. The Kinks' lead singer and songwriter Ray Davies flew back from a North American tour specifically to re-record the lyric, swapping out Coca-Cola for Cherry Cola. That single change was enough to lift the ban. Once it was on the radio, the song connected with audiences immediately. It reached number 2 in the UK singles chart and number 9 in the United States. It became one of the band's signature songs, a fact that carries particular weight given how deep and celebrated the Kinks' catalog already was. What makes the story more notable is that the BBC's objection had nothing to do with the song's real content. While the subject matter might have been considered edgy or unconventional by the standards of 1970, the ban was about a soft drink. Ray Davies jumped on a transatlantic flight and fixed it with 4 words. The song went on to be listed among Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time. Number 5, Imagine by John Lennon.
Imagine there's no heaven.
When John Lennon released Imagine in 1971, the reaction was far from universal admiration. Conservative critics attacked it for what they saw as an endorsement of atheism and anti-establishment politics. The song's vision of a world without countries, without religion, and without possessions provoked genuine hostility in several quarters. It was banned in various regions. Decades later, following the September 11th attacks, Clear Channel Communications included Imagine on a list of songs that radio stations were advised not to play, citing concerns about the song's lyrics being inappropriate during that period of national mourning. Religious groups denounced it. Cold War-era commentators read communist sympathies into it.
Imagine all the people.
Some radio programmers were simply nervous about its directness. Lennon wasn't wrapping the sentiment in metaphor. But the public heard something different. The song reached #1 in the UK upon its release. In the United States, it peaked at #3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and later returned to the charts following Lennon's assassination in December 1980, reaching #1 in several countries. Over time, Imagine became one of the most covered songs in history. It has been performed at the Olympics, at New Year's celebrations across the world, and at countless ceremonies marking moments of grief and hope. In 1999, Rolling Stone ranked it among the greatest songs ever recorded. The Grammy Hall of Fame inducted it. The song that critics wanted silenced became a permanent fixture of the human soundtrack.
You may say I'm a dreamer.
There's a certain irony in the fact that a song accused of promoting dangerous ideas has repeatedly been chosen to mark moments of global solidarity, from the opening ceremony of the Athens Olympics in 2004, to countless New Year's broadcasts, to vigils held in the aftermath of tragedies. Lennon recorded it in his home studio in Ascot, England, with a simplicity that matched the directness of its message. He had always been direct. The song was a natural extension of who he was. John Lennon was shot and killed on December 8, 1980. Imagine returned to the top of the charts in the UK following his death, and has remained in near constant circulation ever since. What the critics of 1971 dismissed as subversive or naive, time has treated as something closer to essential.
And the world will live as one.
#4, Maybe I'm Amazed by Paul McCartney.
Maybe I'm amazed at the way you love me all the time.
By April 1970, the world was reeling from the news that the Beatles had broken up. Into that turbulent moment, Paul McCartney released his debut solo album, a quiet, mostly home-recorded record called McCartney. He had made it almost entirely alone during a period of personal and professional difficulty, playing most of the instruments himself. The critical response was brutal. Reviewers called the album unfinished, patchy, and thin. Many felt McCartney was simply putting out half-formed ideas, a far cry from what audiences had expected from one of the world's most celebrated songwriters. The album arrived alongside the chaos of the Beatles' split, which overshadowed everything, and critics were in no mood to be generous. Buried near the end of the record was a song McCartney had written as a tribute to his wife, Linda. He had never intended it as a single. It was just part of the album, a private declaration poured into a recording.
Maybe I'm amazed at the way you help me sing my song.
Maybe I'm Amazed received no single release in 1970 and largely went unnoticed beyond McCartney's devoted fan base. 6 years later, a live version recorded during the Wings Over America tour was released as a single. It reached #10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1977 and became far more widely known than the original had ever been. The studio version is now considered one of McCartney's finest recordings, a powerful, emotionally direct love song that gets played at weddings, used in films, and cited regularly as among the best things he ever wrote. The album critics called unfinished turned out to contain a song that would outlast many of the polished records released alongside it. #3, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. In October 1975, Queen wanted to release a song called Bohemian Rhapsody as the lead single from their album A Night at the Opera. The song ran nearly 6 minutes. It had no traditional chorus. It moved through a piano ballad, a mock operatic section, a hard rock passage, and back again. It sounded like nothing that had ever been played on pop radio. EMI, Queen's record label, was not enthusiastic. Their management expressed the same concerns. Radio programmers on both sides of the Atlantic were baffled by it. A 6-minute single with no chorus was simply not something radio was equipped to handle, or so the thinking went. Even John Deacon, Queen's bassist, reportedly had private fears that releasing it would be the worst decision of the band's career. Producer Roy Thomas Baker described the label's resistance directly. Radio stations on both sides of the Atlantic were saying the record companies claimed it would never get airplay. The band had a different idea. They slipped a copy to Kenny Everett, a well-known British disc jockey at Capital Radio in London. Everett loved it. Over one October weekend, he played it 14 times on air. By Monday morning, record stores were being overwhelmed with requests for a song that hadn't even been officially released. EMI had little choice but to release it in full, unedited. The song went to number 1 in the UK and stayed there for 9 consecutive weeks. Music critics, who had reacted with bemusement and called it self-important and overwrought, eventually had to reckon with how wrong they had been. NME's Pete Erskine had written at the time that Queen sound extremely self-important, and Melody Maker called it a superficially impressive pastiche. Those quotes are remembered today mostly as curiosities. The song reached the US top 10, and then, after Freddie Mercury's death in 1991 and its appearance in Wayne's World in 1992, it returned to the top of charts around the world. In December 2018, it became the most streamed 20th century song of all time. It has now reached number 1 in the UK twice with the same recording, the only song in history to have done so. Number 2, Dancing Queen by ABBA. Released Dancing Queen in August 1976, they had been carrying a reputation problem for the better part of 2 years. Swedish pop music was not taken seriously by the critical establishment. Despite their 1974 Eurovision win with Waterloo and a run of major international hits, serious music critics on the continent and in the UK regularly dismissed them as artificial, lightweight, and cliché. Swedish tastemakers were particularly relentless in their criticism of the group's own countrymen. Even inside the band's camp, there had been debate about releasing the song at all. Their manager Stig Anderson had pushed for a different song, Fernando, a ballad, to precede Dancing Queen, believing a softer track would appeal to a broader audience. The band agreed, and Dancing Queen was held back for 5 months. The song had already been performed publicly before its release as a single. On June 18, 1976, ABBA performed it at a televised royal gala in Stockholm, celebrating the wedding of King Carl XVI, Gustaf of Sweden, and Sylvia Sommerlath. The moment launched the song into the public consciousness before it ever hit record shops. When it was finally released, Dancing Queen went to number 1 in Sweden, the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, West Germany, Norway, the Netherlands, and more than a dozen other countries. In Sweden, it remained at number 1 for 14 weeks. In the United States, it became ABBA's only Billboard Hot 100 number 1 hit. The critics who had spent years calling ABBA artificial and cliché found themselves looking at the biggest pop song of 1976. The song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2015. It remains ABBA's best-selling single in the UK, with over 1.65 million chart sales. Number 1, Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty.
Winding your way down on Baker Street,
By 1978, Jerry Rafferty had been out of the music business for 3 years. His former band, Stealers Wheel, the group behind the well-known 1972 song Stuck in the Middle with You, had broken up, and the legal dispute surrounding the split had tied Rafferty in contractual knots that prevented him from releasing any new material. For someone who wanted nothing more than to make music, those years were long and frustrating. Rafferty spent much of that time traveling between his home in Paisley, Scotland, and London, where he stayed with a friend on Baker Street in Marylebone while meeting with lawyers. He was watching the city grind away at him and writing about it. When he finally got back into the studio in late 1977, the soft rock sound he was crafting was decidedly out of step with the times. Punk had taken hold in Britain. New wave was reshaping the landscape. A reflective, layered, melodic track built around a saxophone riff didn't seem like the thing anyone was waiting for. Rafferty's career was so far off the radar that no one was particularly watching. The saxophone part itself had its own near miss. When recording the song at Chipping Norton Studios in Oxfordshire, guitarist Hugh Burns tried playing the opening hook on guitar and immediately shook his head. It needed something else. Rafferty had always heard it as a melody for a wind instrument. Session saxophonist Raphael Ravenscroft was brought in, and what he played on his alto saxophone, slightly flat by his own later admission, became what is now described as one of the most recognizable saxophone solos in the history of popular music. Baker Street was released as a single in February 1978. It reached number 3 in the UK and number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it held that position for 6 consecutive weeks.
Another year and then you'll be happy.
It reached number 1 on the Cashbox chart in the United States. The saxophone riff is credited with sparking a resurgence in the instrument's popularity across pop music throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, what became known in Britain as the Baker Street phenomenon. The song has since been certified by BMBM as having received over 5 million radio performances worldwide. The man who had spent 3 years locked out of his own career came back with a song that changed how an instrument was heard for a decade.
You're going, you're going.
Every single one of these songs had something working against it. A stubborn label executive, a skeptical radio network, a music press that wasn't ready, or just the simple bad timing of being too different for the moment it arrived in. And every single one of them survived. That's the thing about a song that's truly meant to be heard. It has a way of finding its audience, whether the gatekeepers are on board or not. The people who loved music were always out there, waiting. They just needed to hear it first. If you enjoyed this trip back through some of music's most surprising second chances, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. There are plenty more stories like these, and we're just getting started.